ladies and gentlemen, good evening, friends. Tonight I want to ask you a question that echoes across the halls of time, a question that has been asked by many who have walked this earth. Can you run from God? Now, I know some of you may be thinking, why would anyone try to run from God? And yet, so many of us, at some point in our lives, have tried to do just that. We may think we can escape His presence, flee from His calling, or hide from the truth of His love. But the Scriptures tell us something different. They tell us that we cannot outrun Him no matter how fast or far we go. You see, friends, God is not just a distant figure in the sky. He is near to us, closer than our very breath. And no matter how far we may try to run, His love will always chase after us. And I want you to know today that if you find yourself running, God is not here to condemn you, but to bring you home. So I ask you again, can you run from God? Let's take a journey together tonight to discover the truth of this question and how it can change your life forever. God's presence is inescapable. No matter how far we go or how hard we try to hide, we cannot outrun Him. It's a reality that many try to avoid, but it remains true throughout the entirety of the Bible. From the very beginning, we see that God's presence was ever present. He walked with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and even when they sinned and hid from Him, He sought them out. God wasn't satisfied with distance. He didn't let them go, He pursued them, because His presence, His love, is something we cannot escape. In our own lives, we may try to run away from Him in various ways. We may run from God by retreating into our work, our relationships, or our pleasures, thinking that by distracting ourselves, we can avoid His presence. We may run from God by choosing sin, thinking that our actions or decisions will take us far enough from His watchful eye. Some of us may try to run from God because we feel unworthy, ashamed of our past, and believing that He could never accept us back. But the truth is, wherever we go, we cannot escape God. The Bible reminds us that God is omnipresent. Psalm 139, verse 7 and 10 captures this truth perfectly when it says, "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there." No mountain is high enough to hide His presence. No valley is deep enough to escape His watchful gaze. The same God who formed the earth and the heavens is the same God who is with us in every moment, guiding us, seeking us, and calling us back when we wander. Running from God is often a futile attempt to escape something we don't fully understand. It's an attempt to avoid the discomfort of surrender. When we try to escape, we believe that by running away, we can escape the consequences of our actions or the responsibility to follow God's plan. But as we see in the story of Jonah, running from God is never a solution. Jonah tried to flee from God's calling by boarding a ship, sailing in the opposite direction. Yet even in the stormy seas, God was with him. No matter where Jonah went, God's will would prevail. Sometimes we find ourselves running from God because we don't understand His intentions for us. We might feel that His plan for our lives is too difficult, too demanding, or too different from our own desires. We question His methods, His timing, and His will. It's in those moments that we try to run. But even in our running, we are never out of His reach. God's presence is not just about being near us physically. It's also about being present in our hearts, speaking to our conscience and stirring us to return to Him. He is not distant, and He never abandons us, no matter how far we try to go. We also run from God because we are afraid. We are afraid of what it means to fully surrender to Him. We fear the changes He might bring into our lives, or we fear the responsibility that comes with accepting His call. But running doesn't change the fact that He's always with us. Psalm 139 tells us that even in the darkest moments, God's presence is there, guiding us. There is no place we can go that will keep us hidden from His eyes. The story of the prodigal son beautifully illustrates this point. When the younger son took his inheritance and squandered it, he was running from his father, seeking fulfillment elsewhere. But when he returned in shame, thinking he would never be worthy to be called a son again, his father ran to him with open arms. The father's love was not contingent on the son's actions or his distance. The father's love remained constant, always waiting always pursuing. And this is how God is with us. We may try to run, but His presence is ever with us, waiting for us to turn around and come back to Him. Even when we run from God, we do not run alone. He runs with us, not to punish us, but to bring us back. God's presence is not just a matter of being near us physically. It is a call to intimacy and relationship. He desires for us to experience His love, to feel the warmth of His embrace, and to live in the fullness of His grace. And even when we turn our backs on Him, He never leaves us. His presence is always there, waiting for us to realize that we can't outrun Him. We may try to run, but the beauty of God's presence is that it is inescapable. The more we try to distance ourselves from Him, the more He comes closer. There is no place, no circumstance, no situation in which His presence cannot reach us. His love knows no boundaries. His mercy has no end. And His grace is ever pursuing. God's presence is not something we can outrun. It is something we must embrace. Something that will forever remain with us no matter where we go. Running from God is often a response to fear, not an escape. It's easy to think that we are running because we want to avoid something we don't want to face, but deep down, most of the time, our running is rooted in fear. Fear of what God will ask of us. Fear of what it might cost us. Fear of what we might have to give up in order to follow Him. Fear of judgment, fear of not measuring up, and ultimately, fear of surrendering control of our own lives. But the truth is that running from God is not a solution to any of these fears. It only compounds them. When we consider the story of Adam and Eve, we see this fear-driven response clearly. After they sinned in the Garden of Eden, the first thing they did was hide. They hid from God because they were afraid. Afraid of His judgment, afraid of the consequences of their actions. God came to them and asked, "Where are you?" Not because He didn't know, but because He wanted them to recognize their fear and to face it. Rather than coming to God in repentance, they chose to run, to hide, to cover themselves. This moment in the garden serves as a powerful reminder that fear often leads us away from the very one who can heal us and restore us. Similarly, when we look at the story of Jonah, we see another man who ran from God out of fear. Jonah was called by God to deliver a message of judgment to the city of Nineveh. But Jonah was afraid. He didn't want to do it. He feared the people of Nineveh, their potential violence, their sin, and the challenge of his mission. Jonah thought he could escape God's call by boarding a ship to a far-off place, hoping that by running in the opposite direction, he could avoid the responsibility God had placed on him. But Jonah's fear and his attempt to run didn't take him any further from God. In fact, it led to an encounter with God that he could not avoid. Jonah's story shows us that running from God is not only rooted in fear of the unknown or fear of the task ahead, but also in fear of the consequences of obedience. We may fear that God's plan for us will disrupt our lives or ask us to give up something that we hold dear. We may fear that the cost of following God will be too high. But what we often forget is that God doesn't call us to something that He hasn't already prepared us for. He knows our strengths, our weaknesses, and the paths that lie ahead. His call may require sacrifice, but it is never something He asks us to do alone. In our own lives, running from God can take many forms. We may avoid Him by filling our lives with distractions, busy schedules, social media, relationships, or substances. We think that by distracting ourselves, we can escape the conviction of His voice, but the truth is, distractions only mask the deeper fear within us. We are afraid that if we truly listen to God, we will have to change. We're afraid that God's call might interfere with the life we've built, the dreams we've had, or the control we think we have over our lives. So we run, we distance ourselves, we close our ears to His voice, hoping that if we ignore Him long enough, He'll leave us alone. But the reality is that God's call doesn't go away. His voice doesn't grow faint. It doesn't diminish with time or distance. In fact, the more we try to run, the louder it often becomes. We cannot escape His calling because His calling is a reflection of His deep love for us. He knows what is best for us, and He is not willing to let us go. Just as a loving parent doesn't let their child wander into danger. God doesn't let us run from the path He has for us. He pursues us, even when we try to hide. At the core of our fear of God is a misunderstanding of His nature. We fear that He will demand too much of us, that He will judge us harshly, or that He will ask us to give up something that is dear to us. But the truth is that God's love for us is not based on what we do for Him or how perfect we are. His love is unconditional. When we run, He doesn't look at us with anger or disappointment. He looks at us. God's love pursues you relentlessly, even when you're running away from Him. It's not like any love we experience on this earth. The love of God doesn't depend on our actions or our worthiness. It doesn't fade when we stray, and it doesn't waver when we fall. No matter how far we run, no matter how many mistakes we make, His love keeps chasing after us, calling us back to Him. It's a love that knows no boundaries, no conditions, and no end. It is an enduring, unwavering, and faithful love that is always present, no matter the distance we try to put between us and Him. When we look at the story of the prodigal son, we see this truth come to life. The youngest son, in his desire for independence, demanded his inheritance and left his father's house. He ran away to a distant land seeking fulfillment in the pleasures of the world. He spent everything he had on reckless living, and when a famine struck, he found himself empty, destitute, and alone. It was only then, in the midst of his brokenness, that he realized the depth of his mistake. He decided to return to his father, not because he believed he was worthy, but because he knew that even his father's servants had better lives than he did now. But what happened next was not what he expected. His father, seeing him from a distance, didn't wait for him to come crawling back with a full apology. Instead, he ran to him, embraced him, and showered him with love and forgiveness. The father didn't hold his son's mistakes against him, didn't make him work for his forgiveness, didn't even ask for an explanation. All that mattered was that his son had come back home. The father's love was not contingent upon the son's actions. It was given freely, without condition, and with great joy. This is how God's love works. No matter how far we try to run, no matter how many times we turn away, He is always watching, always waiting, always ready to welcome us back with open arms. His love never gives up on us. It doesn't grow weary or discouraged, and it never quits. God doesn't love us because of who we are or what we do for Him. He loves us simply because we are His creation, and His love is eternal and unchanging. In our lives, it can be easy to believe that God's love is conditional, that it's based on our behavior or our ability to meet certain expectations. We can easily fall into the trap of thinking that if we mess up, if we fall short, God will stop loving us. We believe that if we run too far, if we sin too much, He will give up on us. But the truth is, nothing can separate us. No matter how far you run, God's calling remains. When we try to escape from God, we often think that distance will help us evade His voice. We might think that if we isolate ourselves, distract ourselves, or run to other places, His call will eventually fade and we'll be free from His demands. But the truth is, God's calling is not something that can be silenced or ignored. His purpose for our lives, the plan He has crafted for us, remains constant and unchanging. No matter how far we try to go, God's voice will always find a way to reach us. The story of Jonah is a perfect example of this truth. When God called Jonah to go to the city of Nineveh and deliver a message of repentance, Jonah didn't want to obey. He didn't like the people of Nineveh, and he feared they wouldn't listen. So, instead of heading east to Nineveh, Jonah chose to board a ship going west, away from the city and away from God's calling. He thought that by getting as far away from the assignment as possible, he could escape God's will for his life. But as Jonah soon discovered, running from God's calling is never an option. A great storm arose, and Jonah realized that he could not outrun God's purpose. He could not hide from God's calling. Eventually, Jonah was thrown overboard, and God sent a great fish to swallow him up. Jonah spent 3 days and nights in the belly of the fish, and it was there that he finally came to his senses. In the depths of the sea, Jonah realized that no matter how far he ran, no matter how deep he went, God's calling still remained. His purpose for Jonah had not changed. When Jonah repented and promised to obey, The fish spit him out on dry land, and God gave him a second chance to fulfill his mission. This story reminds us that God's calling doesn't disappear no matter how much we try to avoid it. We can run to the ends of the earth, we can try to distract ourselves with countless pursuits, but the calling on our lives remains. God's purpose for us is not dependent on our ability to follow His plan perfectly. It's rooted in His sovereignty and His desire to see us live out His will. Even when we run, He does not give up on us. Even when we try to go in the opposite direction, His calling, the only way to find peace is to stop running and embrace Him. This is the truth that many of us struggle to accept. We live in a world full of distractions, noise, and confusion, and it's easy to believe that peace can be found in things other than God. We run after success, after relationships, after possessions, or after status, thinking that these things will bring us the peace we long for. We think that by running away from God's call, we will find freedom, and in that freedom we will find rest. But the truth is that true peace is not found in running, it is found in surrender. When we run from God, we're not running toward peace, we're running from it. Our efforts to escape from His presence often leave us feeling more restless, more discontent, and more empty. It's like chasing after the wind, hoping to catch something that can never be caught. We may experience temporary relief from the stress or the struggles of life, but it is always fleeting. The peace we are searching for remains elusive. This is because true peace, the peace that surpasses all understanding, is only found in the presence of God. In the book of Philippians, the Apostle Paul writes about this peace in Philippians 4, 6, and 7. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. This peace is not something we can manufacture on our own. It is not a product of our circumstances, nor is it something we can find in the things of this world. It is a gift from God, a gift that only comes when we stop running and start embracing His will for our lives. When we stop running, when we stop avoiding God's call, we open ourselves up to His peace. Surrendering to Him means letting go of our control, our need to have everything figured out, and trusting that He knows what is best. It's about recognizing that God's plan for our lives is far greater than any plan we could create on our own. And when we embrace that plan, when we surrender our hearts to His will, we find a peace that cannot be shaken by the storms of life. The peace that comes from embracing God is not a peace that means everything will be easy or free from trouble. It's not a peace that guarantees we will never face hardship, but it is a peace that allows us to face those challenges with a sense of calm, knowing that God is with us every step of the way. It is a peace that assures us that no matter what happens, God is in control and He is working all things together for our good. It's the peace of knowing that we are loved, that we are accepted, and that we are never alone. This peace comes when we stop running from God and stop trying to figure everything out on our own. The more we try to control our lives, the more restless we become. The more we run from God's presence, the more disconnected we feel from the source of true peace. But when we choose to stop running, when we choose to surrender to God's will, we allow His peace to flow into our hearts. It's like taking a deep breath after a long time of holding it in. It's a release, a letting go of everything that has been weighing us down. And in that release, we find rest. This peace is not just an absence of conflict or trouble. It is a deep, abiding sense of well-being that comes from being in right relationship with God. When we embrace Him, we embrace His peace, and that peace transforms every aspect of our lives. It transforms the way we view our circumstances, the way we interact with others, and the way we handle the struggles we face. No matter what happens around us, we can have peace within us because we know that God is with us and that He is in control. But the key to finding this peace is to stop running. Running from God only prolongs the restlessness we feel. The longer we try to avoid His presence, the longer we stay in the grip of anxiety, fear, and confusion. We might think that running will give us freedom, But in reality, it only leads to more chaos and emptiness. The only way to find true peace is to stop running and start embracing God's call. To stop resisting His will and to trust that He knows what is best for us. When we choose to stop running and embrace Him, we open ourselves to the peace that only He can give. This peace is not something we can earn or achieve. It is a gift that is freely given to all who choose to surrender to God. It is a peace that surpasses all understanding, a peace that cannot be explained by anything in this world. It is a peace that comes from knowing that we are loved by the Creator of the universe, a peace that comes from walking in His presence, and a peace that can never be taken away. And it's only found when we stop running and choose to embrace Him. In conclusion, the journey of running from God is one that only leads to confusion, fear, and restlessness. We may try to escape His presence, hide from His calling, and fill our lives with distractions, but no matter how far we run, God's love remains unwavering. His calling is relentless, and His peace awaits us. The truth is, we cannot outrun God. His presence surrounds us, His love pursues us, and His plan for our lives will never change. The only way to experience true peace, true freedom, and true fulfillment is to stop running and embrace the loving embrace of the one who has always been with us. When we surrender to Him, we find that His love transforms us, His peace calms us, and His purpose guides us. The question isn't whether you can run from God. The question is, will you stop running and allow Him to lead you into the fullness of His love and His purpose for your life?